Sometimes I'll come across a really juicy tidbit or idea for a podcast episode, and the only problem is I put the podcast out 2 weeks ago. It's just happened to me now with my last podcast, Stings, a poem by Sylvia Plath. You can go and listen to the podcast if you haven't already. I'll give you a sort of quick summary just to make this video make sense. The poem features a speaker, a beekeeper, who is identifying with and searching for the old queen of a hive. And I mentioned in that podcast that one of its most sort of beguiling lines, for those of you who don't know, on the podcast I go through the poem line by line, so I sort of try and give you a take on every bit of the poem, provide some criticism from other people, and then also my own sort of running commentary. So there is one of the more beguiling lines in the poem for me was a reference to the hive opening in spring, so all the bees leaving, and then there is a couplet that goes, to scour the creaming crests as the moon for its ivory powders scours the sea. So I think I said the first bit sounds very much like the bees going off to scour the creaming crests of flowers, and the second bit is slightly more oblique. The moon for its ivory powders scours the sea. I think I said something about how this sounds like a kind of matriarchal natural cycle, and maybe the ivory powders sounds like the ring of light around a full moon's face, almost like makeup. Since then, I've been reading not so much about Plath for a change. I've been back to reading about Shakespeare, particularly Macbeth, for one reason or another. But I actually came across something in relation to Sonnet 107, the line which goes, "The mortal moon hath her eclipse endured," which reminded me that often moon imagery in Shakespeare or Elizabethan writing elsewhere refers to not just the goddess of the moon, Diana, in Roman mythology, but Elizabeth herself. The goddess Diana was a virgin goddess, and our virgin queen was thus sort of conflated in moon imagery with Elizabeth. It was the phrasing of the line in Sonnet 107, the mortal moon, which really just yanked me straight back to Stings, because one of the pieces of criticism that I really, really liked in regard to Stings was by Judith Kroll. And she wrote something that really made Stings click for me, which was that Plath's speaker is not identifying with the individual bee. It sounds like the speaker is sort of saying that there is some kind of direct kinship between her and the individual queen bee, the old queen who's getting pushed out of the hive. There's a new queen taking up the throne, and the old queen is being kicked out in her torn shawls. There's all this imagery of her being really down at heel. And Judith Kroll says, no, she doesn't identify with the individual queen bee. She's talking about the idea of queenship. There is a mortal bee that will live and die and perish in its body, and there is then the immortal queenship. And I think this makes sense in regard to another line in the poem, I stand in a column of winged, unmiraculous women. Immediately you get the image of someone standing in a swarm of bees, perhaps, or a queen in a hive of bees. It's sort of literally living in a column of winged, unmiraculous women. But it could also mean the speaker is standing in a hereditary line of unmiraculous queens. It sort of makes the paradox of that line make a bit more sense. Winged unmiraculous women doesn't make any sense. A winged woman is miraculous. So winged unmiraculous women makes it sound like the service we're doing is miraculous, but the servant, the queen herself, the body, is just a body. Just like in traditional ideas of kings and queens, there was the idea of the king's two bodies, the mortal one and the immortal one. Oh yes, I meant to say that the moon imagery crops up in other places, like A Midsummer Night's Dream. Cold, fruitless moon, says Theseus, fruitless, referring to this virginal aspect of the moon. So, I thought, perhaps Plath also has a slightly Elizabethan theme to this poem. She would have known that Queen Elizabeth was associated with the moon, and also bees had a bit of a heyday in Elizabethan literature, frequently written about, including by Shakespeare, as if they are this ideal society. In 1608, the poem Parliament of Bees, which was enormously influential, came out. That's Jacobean, but still in Shakespeare's time. So then on to the second line of this beguiling couplet, the moon for her ivory powders scours the sea. Well, I was thinking of what I said about the makeup thing, which I was thinking about the sort of dust ring around the moon's face. Elizabeth I was famously pale face. She was, the paintings of her show her that she's absolutely caked in white makeup. And the scouring the sea bit, I immediately thought of her with the painting with her, a hand on the globe, the Imperial Elizabeth scouring the oceans, the Queen of the Armada, etc., etc. So you have this idea of a moon-faced imperial queen sending out her followers, her armies to scour the seas, just as the queen bee sends her followers out to scour the flowers and keep her queenship alive, keep her made up. And I think that chimes really well with some of the making up imagery that's already there in the poem Stings earlier on. Plath speaker enameling the hive looking like a big painted teacup. We know Plath was reading a lot of history at this time. She said in an interview around this time in relation to another poem in the bee sequence, which were all written in the same week, 6 days, I think, that she was becoming increasingly historical. She was reading particularly about Napoleon Bonaparte. She reviewed a book on his wife, Josephine, and the poem that I covered before Stings, The Swarm, is full of Napoleon imagery. The ending of Stings is very famous. The old queen leaves the hive and is described in ways that sound simultaneously fragile and ferocious. She has a lion-red body, wings of glass. She cuts across the sky like a red scar, red comet. So she could be flaming awe-inspiringly across the sky, but she's also like a red scar. This is someone, or the bee, or a personage, or a kind of self that has suffered, has scars, has a lot of painful history. And there's something ambivalent about that seems to chime with Shakespeare's line in Sonnet 107, "The mortal moon hath her eclipse endured." He could be referring to Elizabeth enduring a threat. Elizabeth had all sorts of threats. I've read certain theories about which controversy, which scandal this might be referring to, that Elizabeth has come through the other side. It also could refer to Elizabeth's death. The mortal moon hath her eclipse endured. In the same way that people say the king is dead, long live the king. What sounds paradoxical refers to that two-body system I was talking about earlier, the immortal kingship or queenship and the mortal king or queen. And the last little thing I wanted to mention, which is just too tantalizing to skip, is that one of the reasons that Queen Elizabeth wore such heavy white makeup was to cover up her smallpox scars. Complementing the imagery in Plath's poem, underneath the ivory powders is a red scar, a red comet.